He had a handshake that was just a little too firm. That was the first thing I noticed about my daughter's boyfriend when she brought him to Thanksgiving dinner. Not the cologne, though there was too much of it. Not the blazer that probably cost more than my first car. It was the handshake. The kind where a man grips your hand and holds it half a second longer than necessary, like he's establishing something. Like he's telling you without words that he intends to win. I'm 63 years old. I've been a civil engineer for 35 years. I've shaken a lot of hands. I know the difference between confident and calculating. I smiled. I said, "Good to meet you, Conrad." And I passed the mashed potatoes. My daughter, she's 28, works in marketing for a tech firm in Vancouver. She looked radiant that evening. That's the word I kept coming back to, radiant. The way she laughed at everything he said. The way she kept touching his arm like she needed to confirm he was still there. I'd been watching her grow up for 28 years, and I'd never seen her look at anyone like that. My wife caught my eye from across the table and gave me the small nod that means be nice. I mouthed back, I am being nice. She raised one eyebrow. 29 years of marriage and we've developed our own language. Conrad was charming. I'll give him that. He talked about his import business. He called it international trade consulting, which I've learned is what people say when they don't want to explain what they actually do. He mentioned clients in Dubai, a deal he was closing in Calgary, an investment property he'd just purchased in Kelowna. He dropped figures the way some people drop names, casually, like he didn't even notice he was doing it. My daughter beamed. I ate my turkey and I listened. After dinner, when the women were in the kitchen and my son-in-law, my older daughter's husband, a plumber from Abbotsford, with the handshake of a man who actually works for a living, was helping me clear the table, he leaned over and said quietly, "Something about that guy." "Yeah," I said. "Can't put my finger on it." "I know." We left it there, because what could we say? She was happy. She was 28. She had every right to be happy. That was October. By February, she was engaged. I found out over the phone. She called me on a Tuesday evening, and she was crying, the good kind, the overwhelmed kind. And she said, "Dad, he proposed. We're getting married." I congratulated her. I told her I loved her. I asked if she was happy, and she said, "Dad, I've never been this happy in my life." I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. The wedding planning started almost immediately. Conrad had opinions about everything. The venue. He wanted a resort in Whistler that, when I looked it up, charged upward of $40,000 just for the space rental. The catering. A company he knew personally, which always makes me nervous. People doing business with people they know personally. The guest list ran to 280 names, many of whom my daughter had never met. Conrad's contacts. Conrad's colleagues. Conrad's network. I started doing the mental math. I'm an engineer. I can't help it. The caterer quote came in at $68 a head. The floral designer, a floral designer, not a florist, apparently there's a distinction, quoted $12,000. The photographer wanted $4,000 for the day and another $1,500 for the engagement shoot. The videographer was separate. The cake was separate. The rehearsal dinner, which Conrad felt strongly should be held at a steakhouse in downtown Vancouver, where the prix-fixe was $220 per person, was separate. I sat down one evening in March with a legal pad and a calculator, and I added it up. $340,000. I'm not a poor man. I worked hard, saved carefully, paid off the house in Langley 12 years ago. I have a pension. I have RRSPs. I'm comfortable. But $340,000 for a single day, for a party, was not money I had sitting idle. It was retirement money. It was money my wife and I had spent 30 years building. I hadn't been asked yet, officially, but I could see it coming the way you can see weather rolling in off the mountains. The sky changes color before the rain arrives. It arrived on a Saturday in April. Conrad and my daughter came for lunch. My wife made salmon, the good Atlantic salmon from the market on 56th, with roasted potatoes and a salad. It was a beautiful spring day. We ate on the back deck. The cherry tree was blooming. Conrad had brought a bottle of wine that I recognized as being about $90, which is the kind of wine you bring when you're about to ask someone for something. He waited until after the plates were cleared. He was good at timing. "We've been going over the wedding budget," he started. He was looking at me, not at my daughter, not at my wife, at me. "And we want to give her the day she deserves. I think we can both agree she deserves the best." I said, "Of course." "The venue is confirmed. The catering is confirmed. We've put deposits down." He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was a printed spreadsheet. Clean formatting. Everything itemized. "We're asking both families to contribute. Her mother's side has already committed their portion." He pointed to a number at the bottom of a column. "It was $42,000. We're asking you and your wife to cover the remainder." I looked at the bottom of the page. The remainder was $286,000. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at the number. I looked at Conrad. I looked at my daughter, who was looking down at the table. "That's most of our savings," I said. "It's an investment in her future," Conrad said. "In their future!" He reached over and took my daughter's hand. She looked up and smiled at him. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. That was the first thing that snagged in my mind, the smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I need to think about this," I said. Conrad's expression stayed perfectly pleasant. "Of course, take a few days." My wife walked them out. I stayed at the table with the folder. When my wife came back inside, she sat down across from me. She said she barely spoke the entire lunch. I noticed. She looked tired, not happy tired. The other kind. I picked up the spreadsheet again. I looked at the catering line, the floral line, the venue line. All of it confirmed, deposits placed. Before they'd ever asked me. Before they'd had a single conversation with me about numbers. They had spent money I hadn't agreed to give, and now they were presenting me with the bill. "I want to talk to her alone," I said. It took 2 weeks before I could arrange it. Every time I called, Conrad answered or was present. When I suggested coffee, just the two of us, my daughter said she'd have to check with Conrad. And that phrase, "have to check with Conrad," was a phrase I had never in 28 years heard her use about any man. She had been, since she was approximately 4 years old, the most independently minded person I knew. She had strong opinions about everything, from federal carbon policy to the correct way to pack a dishwasher. "I'll have to check with Conrad" was not a sentence that belonged in her vocabulary. I waited. I stayed calm. I said, "Whenever works, sweetheart. No rush." The call came on a Thursday night. Conrad was out. She called from her cell and she spoke quietly, like she wasn't sure the walls were listening. "Dad," she said, "I need to talk to you." "I know," I said. "I've been waiting." She cried for a while before the words came, and when they did, they came all at once, in the way things come out after they've been held in too long. She'd been with him for 14 months. In the first 3 months, everything was perfect. He was attentive and generous and made her feel, as she put it, like she was the only person in any room. By month 4, she'd lent him $8,000 for a cash flow problem with a client payment that was delayed. He'd paid her back. By month 6, she'd guaranteed a line of credit for his business, $35,000, because the bank required a co-signer and he said it was a formality. He'd handle all the payments. He handled the first 2. Then he stopped. She'd been covering them without telling anyone. By month 9, he'd moved into her apartment, which was fine, except that he stopped contributing to rent. He was between invoices. He was closing a deal. He was always, it seemed, just on the verge of a payment that would fix everything. She hadn't told me because she was embarrassed, because she loved him, because he was always so reasonable when she raised concerns. He had an explanation for everything, a context for everything, a way of making her feel like she was the one being unreasonable for worrying. "The wedding," she said. "I didn't want it this big. I told him that. He said it was important for his business relationships, that the guest list was mostly his contacts and they needed to see him. He used the word present well. Dad, I think he wants the wedding to look like evidence of something he's not." I was sitting in my kitchen. I had a pen in my hand. I had been, without planning to, writing down everything she said. $43,000 in debt that was technically in her name. Does he know you're calling me? No. Good. Don't tell him. Can you do that? A pause. Yes. I need you to do a few things for me. I need you to not sign anything else. Not a contract, not a bank form, not a wedding vendor agreement. Nothing. Can you do that? Ilasbury. Tell him you're waiting for me to review. Tell him your father is old-fashioned and wants to look everything over. Let him be annoyed with me. I can handle that. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. Then I called a friend of mine. We've known each other since university. He's been a family law solicitor in Burnaby for over 30 years. I laid out the situation. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about him. When I finished, he said, "The guaranteed line of credit is the serious one. That's her liability." I know. Has he made any payments in the last 3 months? No. Then we need to move before the lender does. He told me what to call when I hung up with him. The next 3 weeks were the most careful of my life. I spoke to my daughter every few days, always when Conrad wasn't present, always brief, always businesslike. She was remarkable. She was frightened and heartbroken, and still she was clear-headed and steady when it counted. She got herself to a bank branch without him and spoke to an advisor privately. She documented everything she could, statements, transfers, the text messages, where he'd asked for money, the emails about the line of credit. Conrad, meanwhile, was pushing hard on the wedding deposits. He called me twice. Very pleasant, very reasonable. He understood I needed time. He just wanted to make sure we were aligned on timing, because several vendors were asking for confirmation. The florist had another booking they were considering. The resort had a waiting list for that weekend. I told him I was still reviewing. I told him I appreciated his patience. I kept my voice warm and easy. On a Friday evening in May, my daughter told him she needed to talk. They sat down in the living room of the apartment that was, I want to be clear, entirely in her name, her lease, her furniture, her life. And she told him she was ending the engagement. It was very calm. He said he understood she was stressed. He said wedding planning was overwhelming for a lot of people. He said they should take a weekend away, reset, talk through things properly. She said, "I want you to move out by the end of the month." Something changed in his face then, she told me later. Just for a moment. Like a mask adjusting. Then the pleasantness came back, and he said he would need some time to sort his finances for first and last on a new place. She said, "I've spoken to a lawyer." The pleasantness left and didn't come back. He moved out in 11 days, took his blazers, took the $90 wine habit, took the handshake that was too firm, and left. The line of credit took longer. My friend handled the communication with the lender, documented the fraudulent inducement. Conrad had, it turned out, provided false income statements when the line was established, which is a matter that went considerably beyond civil court. The bank's fraud department got involved. Then the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. I won't go into all of it. Some of it is still working through the system. What I can tell you is that by September, my daughter had been formally released from the guarantee, and Conrad was facing charges that had nothing to do with our family specifically, but everything to do with the pattern of what he'd done. To her and to several others it emerged, over a span of years. My daughter came home for Thanksgiving again in October. She helped my wife with the sweet potato casserole, and she sat at the same table where Conrad had shaken my hand 14 months before. She looked tired, the way people look when something heavy has been set down. Not light yet, but lighter. Like the muscles are still remembering what it felt like to carry it. After dinner, when her brother-in-law and I were doing the dishes, he said, "She seems better." "She does," I said. "You did good." I handed him a pot to dry. "She did good," I said. "I just made some phone calls." He shook his head, like he didn't entirely believe me. Maybe he's right. I don't know. I know that I sat at a kitchen table in April and looked at a number that someone wanted to use to drain everything my wife and I had built, and I smiled and said I'd think about it, and I meant something entirely different by that than he assumed. I know that when my daughter called me on a Thursday night from a quiet room, I already had a pen in my hand. I've been a father for 31 years. You learn to recognize weather before it arrives. And when it comes, you don't panic. You don't make noise. You just make sure your roof is solid and your daughter knows which door leads home. I keep thinking about that handshake. Not the spreadsheet, not the number at the bottom of the page, not even the phone call on a Thursday night when my daughter's voice finally cracked open and let everything out. I keep coming back to that first moment at the door. The grip that lasted half a second too long, the cologne, the blazer, and how I filed it away and said nothing and passed the mashed potatoes. There's something uncomfortable in that, if I'm honest. I noticed. I didn't act. I told myself it wasn't my place, that she was 28, that she had every right to make her own choices. All of that was true. But I also know that somewhere between respecting her independence and giving Conrad 14 months of unchallenged access to her life, I let caution become silence. I don't say this to punish myself. I say it because I think it's the part of the story that actually matters. What I've come to believe, after all of it, after the legal calls and the bank meetings in the October when she finally sat at our table again and looked lighter, is that the people who do what Conrad did don't succeed because they're brilliant. They succeed because they're patient and because the people around them are too polite to say the thing they're thinking out loud. He counted on that. He counted on me smiling and passing the potatoes. My daughter held herself together through something that would have leveled a lot of people. She was embarrassed and frightened and in love all at the same time, and she still got herself to a bank branch alone, documented everything he'd asked her to sign, and made the phone call she needed to make. That took something I don't have a clean word for. A kind of moral steadiness. The capacity to look at something you wish were different and deal with what it actually is. She didn't run from the facts. She organized them. Then she acted on them. That quality, the willingness to face a hard truth without flinching and do the right thing anyway, that's not something you can manufacture in a crisis. It either got built or it didn't. I'd like to think some of it came from watching her mother and me over the years, the way we've always tried to handle difficulty quietly and with clear heads, but it also came from her, from something in her own character that Conrad, for all his calculation, completely underestimated. I made some phone calls. I knew who to call because I'd spent 35 years building a life carefully enough to know people worth trusting. That's another thing Conrad didn't account for, that the boring, patient work of doing things right for a long time eventually produces something that moves faster than he expected when it finally moves. Conrad is facing consequences that have nothing to do with our family specifically, and everything to do with the pattern of who he chose to be, repeated across years and across people who trusted him. That's not luck running out. That's just arithmetic. The choices compound. My daughter came home for Thanksgiving. She helped with the sweet potato casserole. She laughed at something her brother-in-law said over the dishes. I've been a father for 31 years. I don't know everything about how to do it right, but I know that the best thing I ever did wasn't protecting her from hard things. It was making sure she knew how to stand up inside them. That turned out to be enough.